Yeah. No big jumps tonight.
Not a lot of comment. A lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's nothing that's gonna draw out the crowd as far as I can see.
I don't think so. But the one thing I know, without a doubt, is I never know.
Yeah, well, sometimes certain things are, it's gonna.
Right, but sometimes it's like, what are these people doing here? It's too cold to be out. Oh, no, not for Reed. I never start late. Now I have to wait. At least Craig's wearing my favorite sweater. Okay, now I can start. No, it looks like public. Okay, are you ready? Ann, ready? Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Albany City Council meeting for February 20th, 2018. Please join Councilmember Moss in the Pledge of Allegiance. May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Moss. Here. Councilmember Pilch.
Present.
Vice Mayor Nason.
Present.
Mayor McQuaid.
Present.
And Councilmember Barnes is sick.
Yes.
Excused.
Okay, number 3, ceremonial matters. Once again this evening, I'm extending the condolences of our city to a community devastated by violence. We mourn with Parkland, Florida, and we stand with students demanding action. I am working with Superintendent Williams and Police Chief McQuiston to learn what we're currently doing to protect our students and our community, and what else we can do both locally and regionally. I will continue to voice encouragement and support for those who advocate for thoughtful and meaningful reforms and fight against those who aim to further destroy our communities. To this end, I have joined Mayors Against Illegal Guns, a part of Every Town for Gun Safety. Albany is not immune to these events, and we will not tolerate violence against our community. Many in our community are working hard to foster an equitable and inclusive school environment, but there's more work to be done. We must continue our efforts promoting social justice and affirming a welcoming and supportive environment in our entire community. We are hearing from brave and articulate students in Florida demanding action. We must find hope through these young people who are turning their anguish into action. History shows us it is the youth who have successfully brought about change in this country through anti-war, Black Lives Matter, and Me Too movements, among others. Let us join with them and work to keep the promise. Never again, MSD. We must empower people who share our values and reject those who do not. We must meet this challenge with courage and through the acceptance of our own personal responsibility to end this madness. We will bring honor to all those who have been murdered. We will adjourn our meeting tonight in memory of those killed in Parkland, Florida.
Mayor, might I just say a couple of sentences?
Sure.
I heard two statistics surrounding this event that I just want to leave everyone with. That in the year 2018, there have been 18 shootings in U.S. schools just in 2018. And there are more retail outlets that sell guns in the United States than there are Starbucks in the world.
Thank you. We have nothing to report about closed session. Consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or a member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. Does anyone on council wish to pull an item? I'm going to pull 5-6. And basically, I just have a comment on our salary schedules. And it's just that we need to stop making these piecemeal adjustments and have a comprehensive plan for review of all the compensation, including job titles and descriptions. And it does bother me that there's the potential for people who are supervisors to make less money than those that they supervise, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. And another concern that I have is that the city manager's current salary is less than that of some staff, and I think we need to, at a not too far away date, look at all of this in a comprehensive piece. Any member of the public wish to pull an item?
Yes, I have a speaker card for 5-7.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mayor McQuaid and members of council, my name is Aaron Priven, and I've lived on Standage Avenue in Albany since 2009. I was disappointed to read the proposed letter from Albany opposing SB 827. As you know, California is experiencing a major housing crisis, which cities around the state have failed to solve by allowing more housing to be built. Instead, each local community looks to its own parochial interests, and the housing shortage continues. Local governmental processes are democratic in name only if they exclude people who would like to be part of the community but cannot afford to be. My wife and I frequently meet people who grew up in Albany but cannot afford to live here because the prices are so high and development to accommodate them has not happened. The same is true in other cities in the Bay Area and around California. A statewide solution like SB 827 is needed to solve our housing problems. The specific changes in the letter are also problematic. Specifically, mandating an affordable housing requirement will ironically decrease affordability in general, because while market rate housing doesn't do as much per unit to increase affordability, because it is not subsidized, it has the capability of having a much larger effect in mass. Design review standards are nice, but in a time of housing crisis, months of delay for building housing to do design review is months when people will be homeless or ill-housed. Tying the changes to RHNA goals or lot sizes or job housing imbalances all sounds great, but in practice, the areas that can handle additional housing are the areas served by transit, which is what SB 827 is all about. In short, I urge you to reject the proposed letter opposing SB 827 and not stand in the way of solving California's housing crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Say something to that? I'd like to respond to that. That letter was something that both the mayor and I worked on. The original letter that was on our docket at the last session was a much stronger letter of opposition. And so that was a bit of compromise. I share with you some of your same views about 827. I think some of the opposition that's been ginned up in by the League of California Cities is just way over the top. We do need something that addresses our housing needs, and particularly in cities that have been so resistant to allowing any kind of housing to be built. You know, in the end, the original proposed SB 827 will more than likely undergo a lot of changes up in Sacramento. We threw out some of those ideas, the affordable housing inclusion, design review, some design review guidelines, and some other links as ideas that both the mayor and myself felt would probably improve its chances of passing. It wouldn't be the kind of gung-ho idea that Senators Weiner and Skinner were proposing. However, it would help if anything passes, and anything that kind of pushes the idea of that we need to really build a lot more housing. So, I'm sorry that it doesn't meet your standards, but I think this letter came closer to what might realistically get through the legislature, and that's why we came up with the ideas that we came up.
Yeah, and I just want to say ditto. I agree with that, and I maybe would prefer that this would not be a letter of opposition, but rather a letter of encouragement of the direction it's going, but with suggested changes, or changes that we hope it make it into the final bill. So I think, fortunately, Albany is not a city that has refused housing. We just haven't had a lot built here, and I think we were making it more and more. Making it pencil out more and more for developers to do that, but I think having some controls in place is wise as well. And since it was brought up, I'd like to speak on item 5.6 as well. I think that it is a good thing to maintain our maintain parity with our neighboring cities in terms of compensation. I think this represents a bump because we perhaps the staff here haven't received a bump in quite some time, and I think that, but I do echo the idea of a comprehensive review of all these positions and salaries. I will say that I have been several times in the position of managing people who did make more than I did. And it's not uncommon in my world, but that's kind of that's not managers managing people. That would be a little bit strange. But sometime in the world of tech, that doesn't happen. It's not unusual. That's it.
I have another speaker for 5.7.
Thank you. I'm Doug Donaldson. I'm a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I'm speaking on item 5.7. The Senate bill that you've written a letter on. I'd like to suggest a change to that letter, and I'll be specific about it. At the end of the first paragraph and moving into the second paragraph, I'd suggest this following language. These issues are challenging and must be addressed. Picks up on the language in the letter. The 15 bills focused on these issues that the governor signed last year have only been in effect for 7 weeks. They must be given a chance to work. SB 827, which would exempt large-scale developments from general plans, housing elements, and zoning ordinances, goes against the principles of local democracy, and we oppose it in its current form. That's your language, the last sentence there. I really do think that that the letter should state, acknowledge the bills the governor's just signed, and we don't know what they're going to do right now yet. And if I could even talk a little bit about those bills for a moment, if you wouldn't mind. AB 494 and SB 229 passed last year, signed by the legislature, build on legislation in 2016 that declared local ordinances that do not conform with the government code regarding ADUs to be null and void. In other words, the state stepped in and is regulating accessory dwelling units. Albany has been applying those standards in the past year, and a number of new accessory dwelling units have been approved at the staff level. This trend will continue, and the new rules that just changed in just 7 weeks ago are more liberal than the ones that were in effect in 2016. Our housing element calls for an average of 7 units a year of low and 7 units a year of moderate income housing, of housing affordable to moderate income families. With the liberalized ADU standards alone, I am sure that we're making good progress to meet those goals. In other words, I think the accessory dwelling unit legislation is helping us. Then there's Senate Bill 35, passed by the legislature, signed by the governor, provides for streamlined, which is ministerial approval for projects in cities that aren't meeting their regional housing needs analysis arena goals, subject to certain criteria. The zoning has to be residential. The project has to be 50% affordable. The project has to be consistent with objective standards in the zoning code, i.e. height, setbacks, et cetera. It cannot involve demolition of housing. The project must be built with using a workforce with prevailing wages and skilled and trained workforce. No parking requirement for these projects, and density bonuses are allowed. There's no CEQA review. Strict timelines that the staff must meet. Is it okay if I continue? Should I stop?
Well, I think we understand where you're going. I think we've looked at a lot of these bills. Appreciate your bringing them to us.
All right.
Would you go back and read me the sentence or the sentences that talk about what you'd like in the letter?
I can give this to Ann.
Okay.
That's all right, and then you can pass it on to you.
Well, I'd kind of like to hear it one more time because I want to decide
Okay.
if we're going to make the changes.
At the end of the first paragraph, then, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say, pick up your sentence, these issues are challenging and must be addressed. And then the 15 bills that focused on these issues, which the governor signed last year, have only been in effect for 7 weeks. They must be given a chance to work. That's my point. That's the point I think this letter should make. SB 827, which would exempt large-scale developments from general plans, housing elements, and zoning ordinances, goes against the principles of local democracy, and we oppose it in its current form. That's from your letter, and I agree with that.
Would you define what's a chance to work? Is that did we give them 3 months, 6 months, a year?
Yeah, I think that the bills that the governor signed, the 15 bills the governor signed, are going to result in a lot of housing. What is it? SB 3, it is, I think, puts a bond issue on the ballot in November for $4 billion. And combine that with SB 35, I just talked about the streamlining process. We could see housing developments come into the counter here that have affordable housing, less than 150 units, that the staff is required to approve find eligible in 90 days, and then, if eligible, approve in 90 days. Boom, done. I think if we see one of those projects, that's going to be a big deal for Albany.
So
That's going to really, really make a big difference in meeting our housing goals. Just one of those projects.
Is it the will of the council to add that sentence in there or not?
I'm comfortable adding some of Doug's suggestions. Kind of to restate, the whole idea, I think, of SB 827 is to kind of give a shove to the whole process and get it going here, because I agree, it does need to be kickstarted. The one hesitation I have about it is, what is that? Give it a chance. What does that mean? Does that mean we wait how many months, how many years? Because, all of us who have had any kind of involvement in this kind of thing, a fast housing project takes 3 years. That's a fast one as far as in my experience anyway. And in many communities around here, 3 years is way too fast for them, and they want to stall it out for 5 years plus. And that's what's killing a lot of the development in the Bay Area in general. Now, to speak to Albany, we have our own issues, and I'm not even sure SB 827 speaks to the kind of problems we have. But I could refine it. I could refine this more. We're sending a letter of suggestion to Sacramento. We're not writing the bill, so it's going to be by definition a little vague. But
Right. At this point, I would leave it as it is. I appreciate your comments, but like Peter says, it's hard to define what give it a chance means, and I would prefer to leave it like this. Your thoughts?
I feel the same way. When we spoke about this a month ago, my concern, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, my concern was just that we make it very clear that we strongly support the effort to address the situation. I'm less optimistic than Doug Donaldson about the bills that were passed as a matter of statewide policy, which is different from how they could address our situation here in Albany. But as a matter of statewide policy, I think more needs to be done, not more waiting. I think, and I think we're appropriately applauding that effort. But the concerns that were laid out in the letter also seem very appropriate.
I'm fine either way. I don't have a strong opinion.
With four of us, it's a little
The two of
awkward.
us worked on that, you know,
Right,
trying to revise
I'm happy
that
to leave it as it is. What do you think?
Happy to
Leave it as it is.
revisit? No.
Leave it like this.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think we could send this off and then be prepared to perhaps send, as, you know, just follow this whole process. And as the sausage is made up in Sacramento, if we see things or hear of things that we like, we encourage. And if we hear of things that are things we don't like, we send a letter about that. I mean, I don't think we always need to be just attuned to the League of California Cities, even though they are our lobbying group, official lobbying group. But I think cities need to kind of look beyond that because they often take a position which is very protective of city rights. But the big picture right now is, yes, we need more housing.
Right. And I did have an opportunity to talk to Senator Skinner on Saturday and shared our concerns with her. And her comment was, well, you know, this bill will be changed quite a bit. So I think monitoring it as it goes through is a really good idea. So with that, we'll leave it as it is. Can I get a motion to approve consent?
So moved.
Second.
Hold the council, please.
Councilmember Moss,
Yes.
Councilmember Pilch.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Nason.
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid.
Yes. And the motion carries. I've lost my place. Okay, it's time for Good of the City. Good of the City is a time for persons desiring to address the City Council on an item that is not on the agenda. Please note, city policy limits each speaker to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits the council's ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda. Do we have speakers? No speakers, okay. Anyone wish to address us on Good of the City? Okay. Council member reports on meetings attended and announcement of future meetings, city manager report and comments. We'll start with Councilmember Pilch.
I wondered if there are any questions about the report. The reason I was moved to make a written report is this is one of the very significant decisions that this EBC would make in terms of what would be the default composition of the power that EBC will provide and the default discount from the PG&E rate. And then what would be the opt-up product. So just to give a little background, so all the CCAs, of which there are many in the Bay Area now, have all started similarly where they offer a product, their first product, the default product, which you opt into is usually at some discount to PG&E. Different CCAs have been at anything from, I think some actually have, one was actually at 0 discount, but it was recommended that giving a little discount off of the PG&E rate is a wise thing to do because it encourages people to stay in the CCA's program rather than to opt out and go back to PG&E. So 0 to 5% has been the ranges of the CCA's. Staff was recommending a 2% discount. And then the other thing that the CCA's try to do is create a greener mix of power. The issue being that the greener your mix of power, the more expensive it is. So staff was at first being conservative with their mix of power and offering a mix of power that would likely be actually maybe a little less clean than PG&E. And this concerned a number of the members of the board. So we ended up asking staff to go for a default product that is cleaner than PG&E's, but give maybe a little bit less of a discount in order to pay for that. And that's the summary. So
But you can opt to have a even more clean product?
that's right. So the other aspect to this that I'm not sure it discusses very much here, but most CCAs have chosen to have an opt-up product, which is more expensive than PG&E's product, but provides like 100% renewable or 100% greenhouse gas free. Usually it's 100% renewable. What staff suggested to us is we go for this opt-up product that's not 100% renewable, but it's 100% greenhouse gas free, but it's a 0% discount to PG&E. So it's kind of a unique offering, I think. You can stay at the same rate you paid with PG&E, but get cleaner, better power as well. You won't get the absolute best power. It doesn't have that product that you actually pay more for than PG&E, but that might be coming down the line to do that, just like a lot of the other CCAs have done. So hopefully that made some sense.
Okay.
Pardon me.
Thank you.
Sure.
So do we need to give
No,
you direction, or?
No, this is just a
information. Okay.
report, just because this is one of the most significant decisions that the board had to make, so that's it.
Okay, great, thank you. Rochelle?
Okay, well, let's see. Mayor McQuaid and I attended a meeting of the Alta Bates Task Force on keeping Alta Bates Hospital in Berkeley. The forum was, we've reported before, was very well attended, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for the effort. There will be another forum. It will be in the West Contra Costa County area, and we'll be working on recruiting leaders from those communities to carry that forward. We also attended a mayor's conference at which the potential change in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District representative for our area was discussed, as well as an interesting presentation on mosquito control.
Right before dinner, lovely.
Yes, a late dinner. And the Albany Landfill Dog Owners Group had a beach cleanup and has expressed, once again, interest in working towards creating opportunities for people who do not wish to encounter dogs on their visits to the beach to help work with us to make that a possibility.
Okay, thank you. On the 8th, I attended the recycling board, county recycling board, where we reviewed an audit report for fiscal year 16-17. Waste management is in pretty good shape because although it had been predicted that the fee income would be going down over the years, the economy is going so great guns right now. Lots of trash is being created and dumped, and so the fees have been going up. We also received a report on cleanup of homeless encampments that included Fremont, Alameda, and our own Albany. Very interesting, the issues around trash and that is created around homeless encampments and how to deal with it. On the 12th, I was at the Projects and Programs County Transportation Commission Committee. That was mostly a discussion of a Lifeline program, which I'm still a little bit unclear of, but essentially Alameda County gets $4.8 million a year from MTC that it can distribute through transit organizations to help in different transit programs to address disadvantaged communities. And on the 14th, I was at the Housing Authority of Alameda County. That was a fairly short meeting, mostly some minor technical stuff, and a report on the generally depressing amounts of money that are coming out of Washington to fund housing vouchers around the county and affordable housing. Essentially, we currently have an administration that's trying to deconstruct the housing and urban development. So that's it for me.
Okay, I attended the Everyone Home Leadership Board meeting. I think 3 of us, or 4 of us actually, were at the Lime Bike opening, which was a lot of fun. I participated in a Climate Mayor's webinar, and last Friday I was honored to be able to attend the YMCA Youth and Government VIP Day in Sacramento, where 2 Albany's, one student now at Albany High School and one former student, former governor of the Youth and Government program, spoke. And for future meetings, it's up on the screen there. I will be hosting a town hall with DA Nancy O'Malley on March 7th at the Community Center from 7 to 8 on sexual assault, sexual harassment. And on Thursday, I'll be attending the Alameda County Summit on Homelessness with Assistant City Manager Isabel LaDuke. And also to remind you, Congresswoman Barbara Lee's staff will have office hours tomorrow from 3 to 5 in the community center. Is there a city manager's report?
Yes. A reminder that we have 2 opening celebrations this month and in early March. The first will be the As You Wish House Coffee Parklet, which will be this Sunday, February 25th from 12 to 2. It's on Solano Avenue. Also, we are going to have the grand opening of Peggy Thompson Pierce Street Park on Thursday, March 1st at 5:30. A reminder that the Civics Academy application period is ongoing through March 22nd. You can sign up online on the city's website. And we have a number of recruitments open right now for the city of Albany, including firefighter paramedic. You can go to our website, albanyca.org/jobs, and find those recruitments. I anticipate there may be a growing list there, so please take the opportunity to look at those and apply. And lastly, we have a quick update on the Marin Buchanan project. We anticipate that we'll be substantially complete by the end of March, and you will see PG&E coming out in mid-March to begin to put the wires where they belong, underground. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we could also add that the Recreation Department is receiving an award on Friday from the California Park and Recreation Society for their partnership on beach cleanup, or not beach cleanup, excuse me, park cleanup with the community members cleaning different parts of the park in cooperation with the Park Department. And also the Albany Community Foundation, as part of that, is also being recognized. Okay, so that brings us to presentation, Alameda County Transportation Commission presentation. Could we have a staff report, please?
Yes, I'd just like to make some introductions and then turn it over to the Susan Chang, who is a representative of the Alameda County Transportation Commission, who is working with the City of Berkeley and the City of Albany on the design and implementation of improvements to the Gilman Interstate 80 interchange in Berkeley. And as council members know, it does have some impacts on circulation in and out of Albany, particularly along the East Shore Highway, and for our bicyclists and pedestrians who would be trying to get to the Bay Trail or to the Tom Bates Fields from, say, Cordonices Creek, as well as maybe other locations. But we've been working very closely with Susan, and I'd like to turn it over to her and her team to make a presentation to the council.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Madam Mayor, the members of council, thank you so much for having us here this evening. My name is Susan Chang. I am the project manager from Alameda CTC, who is the implementing agency for this project. Today, we have in audience Director of Delivery from Alameda CTC, Trinity Nguyen, sitting right there. Thank you. As all of you know, this project has been around for the last 2 decades. I'm extremely happy to report that in the last several months, we have been working very closely with key stakeholders, and we have made some tremendous progress. I wanted to thank Jeff Bond and Alita Sanchez of your staff for being there with us, and also want to acknowledge Farid Javandale from City of Berkeley, who has been helping us get this project to where we are. I especially want to thank, I don't see Preston Jordan here from Albany Stroller and Rollers, and also Karen Perlek from City of Berkeley for their commitment and their dedication of making this project better. This project is currently at environmental stage, and we hope to advance some elements of this project, such as the pedestrian bicycle path on Gilman, in ahead of schedule of interchange to start the construction and end of 2019, beginning of 2020. I'd like to spend a few minutes to introduce a couple of key people from project team. Rodney Pimentel is the project manager from Parsons team, and also David Early, who is making a brief presentation to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Council members, it's a pleasure to be here this evening. Again, I'm David Early with PlaceWorks. My office is in Berkeley, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak to you on a project as local as this. I work throughout the state, and it's nice to be close to home. I gave to council members a handout with frequently asked questions. I wanted to mention to the audience that we have more of those in the back if people would like to get them. And I'm going to take, I think, about 15 minutes just to give you an overview of where the project stands right now. And I'm going to be talking about the project planning process to date, components of the project, implications of the project, some of which Susan already mentioned, and a final slide just to fill you in on future steps. The project, as you all know, is at the Gilman I-80 interchange. It is in the city of Berkeley. The blue dashed line on this map shows the city limit, which I think you know runs along Codornices Creek and then out under I-80 and through the Golden Gate Field stables out to the bay. So the project is in Berkeley, but as Susan mentioned, it has an implication, a set of implications for the city of Albany too, and that's why our team is very happy to have been able to work both with City of Berkeley staff and City of Albany staff on this. We did have a meeting for the public in this room 2 weeks ago. We had a meeting to present this same presentation to the City of Berkeley Transportation Commission last week, and now we're here before you to give you an update as well. Why conduct this project? I think you all are aware that this is one of the most highly trafficked and perhaps dangerous intersections in the immediate East Bay area. The numbers shown here in red represent places at the 4 segments of the off-ramp where you have either injury and fatality accidents or all collisions above the state average. 3 of the 4 legs of the interchange are in one respect or the other above average, and so from a traffic safety perspective, something needs to be done. In the white box there on the right, you also see that the City of Berkeley, who has jurisdiction here, characterizes this as a high-stress area for bicyclists, and the city has a goal to get to low-stress cycling throughout all its major areas. So that's another reason for both for vehicles and for bicyclists, we need to do something at this interchange. The study, the interchange, as Susan has mentioned, has been studied already for the past 20 years. You see here a list of the studies that have gone on, both regionally and by the City of Berkeley. And these studies all concluded that neither stop signs or signalization could work at this interchange. There's simply too much traffic. There's not room for a more standard diamond interchange that would relieve some of the congestion. And really, roundabouts are the only workable solution to address the high amounts of traffic there in such a small area with so many streets coming together. So we've put together a project purpose statement that's quite specific. I won't read every bit of it, but essentially it says, well, this is a project that's for all modes of transportation. We're looking at vehicles and vehicle safety, but we're also looking at pedestrians and bicyclists as well. Those are all equally important parts of this project. We've had a whole series of project meetings going back as far as 2 years ago in early 2016, meeting with public agencies, community-based organizations, local property owners. We've had ongoing meetings with the City of Berkeley, City of Albany, the Strollers and Rollers, and other community-based groups. And as I mentioned, just in the last 2 weeks, we've had 2 meetings with property owners in the City of Berkeley as well. So I want to tell you now about the components of the project and some of the major elements. The project does focus around 2 roundabouts, one on either side of the freeway, accommodating each of the 2 pairs of on-ramps and off-ramps. There are landscaped areas within the roundabouts. There would be sidewalks and at-grade paths that go through around the roundabouts and through the interchange for at-grade access for pedestrians and bikes. And then there will also be a pedestrian overcrossing going over the freeway, either to the north or the south, and I'll show both of those in a couple minutes. It's one or the other, not both, but there will be one of those built. The project also includes a cycle track, which I'll describe in a few minutes, that will run from the end of the bicycle path at 2nd Street to 4th Street, where there will be a new signal installed. There will be bicycle improvements that go from Gilman and 4th, along 4th Street, Harrison and 5th, all the way to Codornices Creek. There will be new access to the Golden Gate Field stables, and there will be gap closure for the Bay Trail as well. And I'll be talking about each of those components as I go through this presentation. So look at the roundabouts. Why do roundabouts? They do improve safety overall. According to data from the Federal Highway Administration, roundabouts result in reductions in collisions, in fatality collisions, in pedestrian injuries, and they do have 75% fewer points of conflict compared to standard intersections. They're also one of the most efficient ways to move traffic through a limited area, and they're particularly appropriate when you have more than 4 streets coming together at an intersection. In this case, there are 6 streets at each of the 2 intersections because of both the off-ramps and the frontage roads, and so the roundabouts are a very efficient and proven solution in this kind of situation. So the roundabouts, in addition to having the vehicular traffic components, they also will include at-grade bicycle and pedestrian improvements, which you see illustrated here. There will be, for instance, a bicycle-only exit going from the roundabout onto East Shore Highway headed northbound. There will be sidewalks and shared use paths on both the north side and the south side of the intersection. There will be a new crossing of 2nd Street on Gilman, and there will be dedicated bicycle and pedestrian connections serving the entire interchange area. So quite a bit of improvement at grade for bicyclists and pedestrians. This is a picture of what the roundabouts might look like. This is a view looking eastbound, essentially from the stable entrance at Golden Gate Fields. You see the foot of Gilman Street here at the right. You see the front roundabout on the west side of the highway. And then back in the back, that's actually the second roundabout on the east side of the highway, there on the looking through the underpass. I do have a couple of videos that will show you the entire experience for both bicyclists and automobile drivers, and I'll show those at the end of my presentation. Before I get to that, let me tell you a little bit about some of the pedestrian and bicycle improvements. As I mentioned, there will be a pedestrian overcrossing, either a southern alignment, which you see here, running along East Shore Highway, crossing over the freeway and then going back along the Tom Bates Sports Fields, or a northern solution that runs north from the roundabouts along East Shore Highway, crosses the freeway, and then goes back along the Golden Gate Field stables. There's not a place for a ramp to come down near the stables. And for that reason, a northern pedestrian overcrossing would actually have to stay high up in the air and go over the roundabout and then go down along the sports fields as well. So that would come down in that area along the sports fields. I've got a few pictures of those to show you here next. Here are visual simulations of the southern overcrossing. This is not the University Avenue overcrossing, which it may look like. This is actually a simulation looking at a similar facility, which you would see if you were the view looking northbound along the freeway. If you were headed east on Interstate 80, this would be the view right near the Gilman interchange. Here is a view looking from the Bay Trail right opposite the Tom Bates Sports Fields of that southern overcrossing. You can see the overcrossing on the right of the pedestrians, and the pedestrians themselves are on the Bay Trail. And then here you see another view along the East Shore Highway with the ramp coming down next to the highway, and this is the view from the East Shore Highway or the frontage road itself. In terms of the north pedestrian overcrossing, this is a view of what that might look like if you were headed southbound or westbound on Interstate 80 from the Diamond Lane. You see the bridge going overhead. Here is a view from that western roundabout near the foot of Gilman, and you see the overcrossing high up in the air above the roundabout right here. And then here is finally a view of it as you would see it from Harrison Street, looking within the city of Berkeley and looking west towards the parts of the bridge next to the self-storage facility. So those give you a sense of what the view might look like of that northern overcrossing. The project, as I mentioned, does also include a two-way cycle track that will extend from 2nd Street to 4th Street. Wanted to show you some examples of cycle tracks in case members of the audience aren't familiar with them. They are being built all over the Bay Area. They provide two-way bicycle access on one side of generally an arterial street. There was a cycle track recently installed on Bancroft Way in Berkeley. You see those on the left side here, and you've also just installed one very recently here in Albany along San Pablo Avenue, and that's pictured on the right-hand slide as well. That two-way cycle track will be either on the north side or south side of Gilman, depending on the location of the overcrossing. So in the case where there is a southern pedestrian overcrossing, the cycle track would be on the south side of Gilman. That's illustrated here in this picture, and you see the cycle track running right along here, going from 2nd to the new signal at 4th. And here you see the alignment that would occur with a northern overcrossing coming from that northern overcrossing around the Ready Arc site, crossing 2nd Street, and then going on the north side of Gilman. So you'd have a different configuration for the cycle track depending on which side we put the pedestrian overcrossing. I mentioned also that there would be further bicycle improvements going all the way to Codornices Creek and the playing fields near Codornices Creek. And 5th, you see those illustrated here going from that new signalized intersection at Gilman and 4th. There would be new paving and sharrows signed on 4th Street. There would be new paving and a revision to parking on Harrison Street, as well as an extension of sidewalks to both expand the area for pedestrians and minimize conflicts for bicyclists. And then there would be new paving on 5th Street and sharrows marked as well, going all the way to Codornices Creek. We would also be closing a gap in the Bay Trail. I think you all are aware that the East Bay Regional Park District will very shortly be building a new trail along the edge of Golden Gate Fields. That project is already planned and underway. The Bay Trail, of course, already exists down along the Tom Bates sports fields, but there has been no funding or project up till now to close the gap between those segments, which is shown here in green. This project would close that gap. It will include construction of the Bay Trail from the existing Bay Trail along the sports fields, along the foot of Gilman Street, around that corner, and connecting to the new East Bay Regional Park District facility. So what are some of the implications of this project? I wanted to quickly go through 4 different issues that I wanted you to be aware of. The first of those is vehicle queuing, which we've looked at very closely. Vehicle queuing, of course, refers to the amount of space it takes for cars or vehicles to stand still when they're waiting to get into an intersection, or in this case, into the roundabouts. It's, of course, very important that that queue of vehicles not extend into another intersection where they would block cross traffic. And so in this case, we've needed to make sure that traffic entering the roundabouts wouldn't conflict with the intersection at 2nd Street. And you can see, shown in yellow here, the 2 lanes of traffic coming into the roundabout, and in fact there is adequate capacity before you back up to 2nd Street to fill up that queuing, which is projected to take 183 feet. So, and we did check queuing on a number of other locations as well, and those queuing amounts are acceptable in all cases. Wanted to also mention right-of-way acquisition. There will be very limited right-of-way acquisition necessary on the west side of the freeway, most notably a very narrow swatch of land along the Tom Bates sports fields that's undeveloped right now. It's essentially the landscape buffer. It's not even well landscaped. It's kind of a drainage way and berm between the road and the playing fields themselves. That would need to be taken in order for the project to move forward. Not really a significant change that anyone would notice. On the west side, the east side of the freeway, there is no need for land takes at all in the case of the southern pedestrian overcrossing. In the case of the northern pedestrian overcrossing, there would be limited land takes, as you see in this drawing, that would be both along the budget rental car and Pacific Steel sites on the south side of Gilman, and then the Ready Arc air gas side on the north side. But really limited right-of-way takes in any case at all. There is a change in vehicular access to to occur, and this is one I know that has been of concern to your staff here, and we wanted to talk to you about. It will no longer be possible under this project to enter the East Shore Highway from Gilman, headed either northbound or southbound. This slide shows the northbound direction, and you can see that cars, rather than vehicles being able to come out of the roundabout and go directly onto East Shore Highway, instead a vehicle wanting to leave this interchange and come onto 2nd Street would come this way, and cars coming out of Berkeley down Gilman wanting to get onto East Shore Highway northbound, for instance, to go to the Target store, they too would need to turn right on 2nd Street and then left on Harrison and right again on East Shore Highway. It is something of a new thing to learn. We are proposing a series of improvements, which I'll show in a moment. It's something that I at least believe that motorists will learn over time, but it will be a change that we wanted to let you know about. We are looking at a number of ways to address that issue. I'm going to talk about each of these three in order. The first of those is that the project will, at its baseline, include enhanced signage, new paving, enhanced streetscape, and a number of changes to make that new route for motorists more noticeable. So you see, for instance, here these green signs that will be installed to let motorists know about the routing that they should take. There will also be improvements in terms of the streetscape, signage, new street trees, and you see those all illustrated here. This is a view looking north on 2nd Street from Gilman, and you can see new trees, new light posts, banner sides, better paving, and perhaps most notably, a monument sign in this location that would be quite a large sign and point motorists to go in that direction to get to East Shore Highway, and the blue placards that you see would be changeable placards to show actually the names of the businesses. So Albany businesses that do business along East Shore Highway, Target, Lumber Liquidators, and so on, would each have a sign in those blue placards that would show motorists how to get into those areas. We have also looked at two other options to try and give additional access as well. We've had limited success there, and so the project does include this change in routing, but I wanted to mention some of the other things we've looked at. We have looked at full roundabout access northbound, in which cars would be able to turn right from Gilman and also come out of the roundabout, and you see that shown in the two yellow arrows. Both of those movements would be possible in this scenario. Unfortunately, that has a number of negative implications. I mentioned queuing before. What happens when you have more traffic in the roundabout wanting to go northbound on East Shore Highway, that creates a conflict with the cars coming in from Gilman, and the queuing then gets much longer, and it extends well past 2nd Street, as you see on that first diagram, all the way up to the railroad track. And so that creates a danger for cars going into the 2nd Street intersection. It possibly creates a conflict with the railroad as well, and is really an unacceptable queuing situation. It also, in the second diagram, it creates a very confusing just directional situation. Cars coming down Gilman would actually be lined up in one lane to make 3 different right turns, onto 2nd Street, onto East Shore Highway, and onto the freeway, and we're particularly concerned that motorists might be confused thinking they're getting onto the freeway when they're actually getting onto East Shore Highway, and there could be quite a bit of confusion in that regard. And then finally, in order to make that work at all, the amount of land that would have to be taken on the Ready Arc Air Gas site would be much more significant, and shown in the dark yellow on that right-hand diagram, you see 2 locations where we'd actually have to cut into that existing building. We believe that that would constitute a full take of the building and create a very significant expense in terms of property acquisition, in addition to obviously putting a significant business out of business, and that's something that's not desirable either. So quite a number of implications to that particular option. We have looked also at right turn only from Gilman. This would not allow access out of the roundabouts. They would still have to go down 2nd Street, but at least traffic would be able to turn right coming from Gilman. That does work a little better. The queuing goes back to the previous amount because you don't have the congestion inside the roundabout. The shorter queuing length means that you don't have that very confusing set of movements, so that issue goes away, but you do still have a significant take of the Ready Arc Air Gas building, one that we do believe constitutes a full take of that building and would create quite an additional amount of expense. And so that too, while it's a slightly better option, still has issues as well. I did want to acknowledge, too, that the same issue would happen going southbound. Motorists would also not be able to leave the roundabouts and go southbound on East Shore Highway. They, too, going to get onto East Shore Highway, Going southbound, you also would use 2nd Street, go down to Camellia, and then either come back northbound on East Shore or continue southbound on East Shore Highway in that direction. To address that, we are planning to turn 2nd Street southbound into a one-way street going south, just like it's one-way northbound right now, going north from Gilman. That would allow for a through travel lane and also allow for a parking lane in that area. There are quite a number of trucks that park on that street right now, and so we want to treat that well also. Finally, I did want to note that the project will also involve changes to access for the Golden Gate Field stables, the stables only. We're looking at a couple of different solutions there, but the problem we have is that this little gatehouse that you might be familiar with right at the foot of Gilman would essentially be on the freeway off-ramp under this new design. It's not possible, of course, to have a gatehouse right on a freeway off-ramp, so we need to find another solution for that. The drawing you see here shows a solution that would take traffic all the way along this frontage road that exists today and then bring them back along an existing road as well into the gatehouse. We're also looking at a second option that would involve a turnaround in this area in the parking lot of the playing fields and bring them back that way instead. So we're looking at two options there and have had very good cooperation with Golden Gate Fields on this particular issue. That concludes my presentation, except just to tell you about future steps. It really is the nose to the grindstone. We're working on ongoing outreach, ongoing design, and project refinement. The environmental review process is getting underway now and will include either one or two environmental documents, possibly one for the whole project, possibly separated ones for the roundabouts versus the pedestrian overcrossing. And we anticipate that those will be done, as Susan said, in time that construction can begin late next year in 2019, and hopefully be completed by 2022. The project team and I are all available to answer any questions you have, as well as any questions that may come from your audience. And I thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we get to see the video?
Oh, yes, the video, please.
My favorite part.
All right, so this first one is the automobile experience. And just let me say before I get it started, because the drivers all drive fast is one of the things we've learned here. And I hope this is the right one. It's marked as the right one. Let me just take a minute here. Oh, it's at the end. That's why it doesn't look like the right one. There we go. Okay, here we go. So the motorist here will be exiting the freeway headed westbound or southbound on 80. Get off on the ramps. You see in this still that it'll start moving in a minute. You see the stables on the right. The motorist will then go through the first roundabout on the west side of the freeway, go under the freeway, and through the second roundabout, and it will end heading eastbound on Gilman. So here we go. How do we do this? Have to actually hit the button. Here we go. This is a world in which first all the cars are blue, then they're all red, then they're all green. But so here we come off the freeway. You can see that there are two lanes within the roundabout, and that left-hand lane is for the cars that are going to go into Berkeley. This is going around the roundabout, and now we see the freeway ahead of us. And then we head under the freeway. And then, of course, we come into the second roundabout. You see now Pacific Steel right ahead of us. We go around the roundabout, and that's Gilman up ahead. Ready Arc and Air Gas on the left, and now we're headed along Gilman, and you can see the bike track just starting up the cycle track there. So that's a view for the motorist. We have also a view for the pedestrians and cyclists. Whee! See, they're fast, these cyclists. Let me just stop this for a minute if I can. So this cyclist you've already seen him, he's very quick. He or she is going to be riding westbound on Gilman, starting at the cycle track, going through from the cycle track, across 2nd Street, go further westbound on the dedicated path, under the roundabout, and then out towards Golden Gate Fields. And I'll start that again from the beginning. So there we are, crossing Second onto the dedicated pathway. You see the dedicated facilities for cyclists and pedestrians. You don't have to ride like that when you go on here. I'm coming under the freeway. Again, dedicated pathways for the pedestrians and cyclists. One of the advantages of the roundabouts is there's always cars or traffic is only coming in one direction each time you cross a roadway, so you only have one way to look, and that's the end there at the Tom Bates Sports Fields at the foot of Gilman. And then finally, I'll put up the other one. The other one starts exactly the same way, coming down Gilman. The cyclist, again, along the cycle track and then the bike path, but then that cyclist will go up over the southern overcrossing, and you'll see that experience as well. So here we come down the cycle track, crossing the railroad tracks. Cycle track ends here at 2nd Street, and we go on to a dedicated pathway. This, again, it's the same routing, of course, that we had before. Now, at this point, rather than turning right to go under the freeway, we go up along East Shore Highway and start up onto the overcrossing. That cyclist, he got around very fast to come to that other spot. There is a bridge or a stairway that goes back down to the other side, down along East Shore Highway to go down to Page, and a stairway you'll see here on the left also going down to the Tom Bates Sports Fields. But as a cyclist, we continue down the ramp to the right. That guy came around again.
This one last time.
And now we're down at pretty much at grade at the Tom Bates Sports Complex and at the roundabouts themselves. So there you have it. Thank you for reminding me to show those, and we're available to answer any questions you may have.
Excuse me, we'll get to public comment in just a minute. Are there questions from council?
Yeah, just one. One thing I'm noticing for the first time is that there's only 2 lanes of traffic underneath the freeway, one in each direction. Is that correct? Unlike the 2 currently. And that's, I'm sure that, and I suppose that's by design, but maybe you want to explain to us why you can get away with only having the 2 lanes.
I'll take a stab at that, and Rodney Pimentel, who's the engineer, is here as well. But I think the way I think of it is that the roundabouts themselves are essentially what the traffic engineers call metering devices. They meter out the traffic and limit the amount of cars that can, or vehicles that can come through. Once the cars, there's actually quite a bit of capacity because the cars are constantly moving within the roundabout. There's not a need to stop like there is at a light, but you do put traffic through in a metered way so that 1 lane in each direction is quite sufficient once you come out of the roundabout.
Thank you.
How'd I do?
Michelle, do you have a question?
I'll wait. You go ahead.
Yeah, kind of following that same track. In the roundabouts, there are 2 lanes going in directions, but there's, at least the way it's represented in the videos, it's a continuous line between the 2 lanes, but traffic is allowed to change lanes in the roundabout?
As you're driving around the roundabout, you'll be able to change from one lane to the other. If you come into one lane because of where you came in, and then you need to get into the other lane because of where you're going to exit, it is legal and encouraged to cross that white line and to get into the proper lane.
So why wouldn't you have a dashed line as opposed to a continuing line?
Yeah, we're still working through the details of the striping. The videos are really kind of very crude representations of what the actual striping will look like. But typically, you would have a dashed line for lanes you'd be able to cross through, and a solid line where you want to keep vehicles from changing lanes.
Okay.
Hang on, could you come up to the mic or use the hand mic?
Anne's going to bring him.
Fareed, do you have comments? Okay, now I'll get the real scoop.
Just to add to that answer, one of the things that you'll have noticed in the discussion of the queuing in the westbound direction coming on Gilman is we, at that point, have 2 lanes entering into the roundabout. And there, the left lane is intended to be going through to the west side of the freeway. The right lane is intended to go onto the northbound freeway. So to some extent, yes, where there are solid lines in the final design, we don't intend people to cross because we want them to enter the roundabout in a particular lane to get to a particular destination to minimize lane changes in the roundabout. But as Rodney said, that's all going to be cleaned up in the final design, and the folks preparing the renderings didn't have really full access to that or knowledge of traffic engineering principles precisely, but yeah, it's a good question.
Okay. And then one other question that popped in my mind while watching all this. The 2nd Street south of Gilman is a one-way going south. I happened to go down that street this morning. It's primarily used by the 2 steel companies there as a loading dock, and so they have stuff all over it. Are you certain that they will kind of change their ways? Because it's going to get a lot more traffic, in at least the way.
We've been working with them closely, and they're very aware of this. That's actually one of the reasons to make it southbound only, is that, among other things, that allows us to dedicate one of the 2 lanes as a parking lane for those trucks. And so that use that's evolved there has been one that's evolved informally. It's one that I think I can say the city of Berkeley would like to support those businesses, and yet it's a kind of idiosyncratic use that happens right there, and we need to find a way to accommodate it within the confines of this project also. And that's why we have 1 through lane and 1 parking lane in that revision to the street.
And then once you go far enough south on 2nd, past your first opportunity to turn up to the side road, there's a giant homeless encampment right now. Would that likely change, or would that just not be?
There are a number of homeless people living in this overall area, and that's not directly a part of this project. Certainly both cities and Caltrans and others are working on homeless issues, and we're aware of those, but it's really not part of this project to try and figure out how to address the homeless problem that exists throughout the area.
Yeah. I do have a little more information on that with regards to the Pathways project on 2nd Street, a ways south there. For the moment, the assumption is that would remain, but the traffic flow that we're planning out for this project would not conflict with that. Anyone wanting to get to East Shore would make that right turn to get to East Shore. If they wanted to cross the railroad tracks, they would cross the block earlier. So we are accounting for the presence of that for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you.
So I have 2 questions. One that you did address the other day, but I'd like to hear it again. You have the signage there at 2nd and Gilman for the Albany businesses, but I'm wondering where else you could put signage, because people coming off the freeway may not know to go to 2nd, or people coming the other way. I think our businesses really need a strong presence there.
Right. Well, we would want that monument sign to be noticeable for motorists coming in both directions. There would be signage further east on Gilman to give motorists coming out of Berkeley more notice to look to turn onto 2nd, and we want to find appropriate places to put signage, possibly even along the freeway, and certainly coming out of the roundabout to let people know that they're going to be turning to get onto 2nd to get ultimately onto East Shore.
And who would pay for all the signage?
And that's all part of the project.
Okay, great.
No.
Great. Could you come up?
Use the mic, please.
We're working very closely with City of Berkeley and City of Albany to actually find out the exact location of the sign would be most beneficial for the people coming off the roundabout.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead.
Well, my last question at this point is, looking at having moved the gate at Golden Gate Fields and having the access sort of going all the way around the barns almost, thinking about an emergency there, be it a medical emergency, be it a fire, it seems like there's a longer distance to travel. Has that been thought about? Is there anything that Is there concern about that?
Well, let me be clear just for the record. No, we're not talking about moving the gatehouse. The gatehouse actually stays where it is, and we're just changing the routing to get there. It is a longer routing, and primarily the routing is longer for trucks because trucks can't make a sharp turn. But there would be a cut in the median between those roads so that an emergency vehicle could get in immediately and turn straight in.
Okay, thank you. Rochelle?
Yeah, the corner of Second and Gilman, that will be, how will that be controlled? Will there be,
That will
will it
be
be signalized or?
It will not be signalized. It will be through traffic on Gilman, and there's no need for a stop sign control, actually, because you can only enter it. You can't exit from either. On Second Street, we'll be going outbound one way, both north and south, so there's no stop sign control because there's no cars coming in there.
But if you come from the freeway, you will never be able to make a left onto Second.
Well, actually, that's not true because there will be a signalization at 4th, and I learned this word from Rodney. There will be platoons of cars, vehicles coming from that signal. It's only a long block. Of course, there's the railroad at what would be 3rd Street, but it's essentially a long block from that signal at 4th. And so cars will be stopped at 4th. When the cars are stopped at 4th, traffic will be able to turn left onto 2nd.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other questions from council?
Yeah, I think that I'm realizing that you probably want to address why the northern bike pedestrian alignment exists. And if you'll let me paraphrase why, one of the reasons is to allow to not have to allow people coming from the north to cross Gilman to get to the bridge, and it's one of the reasons why the cycle track is, well, the cycle track would exist in either configuration now, but people, for example, people coming from the village or kids coming from the ball fields, if you have the northern bridge, they would not have to cross Gilman to get to it. And the other reason for the northern alignment is that you could potentially see, and you could see in one of your presentation slides, how, what is it, Harrison Street? If you look down Harrison Street, you see the bridge, and that means that in the future, that bridge could be a ramp from the northern bridge could come down onto Harrison Street, and then those accessing it from the north, accessing the bridge from the north, would never have to actually get onto Gilman at all to access that facility. So that was one of the reasons, those are some of the reasons why a northern, there you go. So you could see in the future, if there were money available, you could extend a ramp down from that bridge onto Harrison, and then folks coming from the north would only have to go to Harrison, then up a ramp and across the freeway, rather than having to go actually on Gilman Street. Did I paraphrase the reasons for the consideration of northern alignment?
Absolutely. Of course, in this area, if you wanted to create a pedestrian bridge here, the idea would actually be the bridge would be in the air here and it would go past the viewer here in the air and go over the railroad tracks and then go back down on the east side of the tracks, and that would eliminate conflicts for crossing the railroad tracks as well as crossing the freeway.
Right. Okay. So in the current, without that, which is not part of this, which has never been part of this plan, bicyclists and pedestrians will be crossing the railroad tracks, right, as they do now.
Right. Yeah, and I would like to add in that regard, the team has been working incredibly hard with Preston and other members of the community to make sure that the current access for bikes and pedestrians along Gilman will be as safe as possible. And just in the last couple of weeks has made very significant strides in designing, particularly the intersection of 2nd and Gilman, as it would be used by cyclists, and I think have gotten to a point where I think folks are getting more and more comfortable that solution may work actually for a southern overcrossing. We're certainly not done yet, but we're doing what we can.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. It's great to hear.
How did you calculate the traffic counts for calculating the queuing. You know, you show the queue not reaching Second and Gilman. How did you get the numbers?
I'll tell you
those
honestly, I
calculations?
didn't do it. I don't think anyone in this room did, but I think Rodney can explain how it was done by our traffic engineering
Sure,
team.
we used the Alameda County travel demand model to determine the volumes of cars that would be approaching the roundabout from all different directions, and then using a software program called Sidra, which is a roundabout operational program. It basically takes all those volumes from all the cars coming from all those directions, and you can actually determine the amount of, or the length that cars have to queue to be able to get through the roundabout. And so taking the lengths of those queues, that's what David has showed on his slides. And that's for our design year, which is 2040. So it's 20 years out.
Okay, well, I'm troubled, you know, that I'm just intuitively very skeptical of of what's going to happen at Second and Gilman. And I should mention that I spent many years at Lake Tahoe and am familiar with the Kings Beach roundabouts, which you've probably heard about, where the traffic models were not reliable. You know, they were what they were, but they didn't predict reality. I think one thing that is very important to understand about this intersection right now is that people go to enormous lengths to avoid it. And when you rebuild it, you're going to have, you're going to see an immense surge in demand over what exists right now. And I really believe, do you have a backup plan if Second and Gilman turns into a nightmare? If you're just, you know, moving it a little east? For signalization, or how would you deal with Second and Gilman if it gets, if the demand outstrips the model?
Yeah, so we have looked at the left-turning vehicles, I think is what you're alluding to, is like if you're traveling eastbound on Gilman to be able to make a left onto 2nd Street. Yeah, and we have definitely studied that and the lengths of the queues that would be generated, again, using the travel demand model to make sure that they are accommodated and can make those left turns. And as David has talked about, because the cars are metered at 4th Street, there's a gap, you know, in between when the red lights turn green, and so that allows for all those cars to make that left turn.
I think the backup plan, if we had to, would be to change the timing at that signal at 4th so that the gaps were longer. And that could certainly be studied. In the very long term, I mean, there are other implications that are negative of this, but you could put a second signal at 2nd and Gilman, but that has other implications for the operation of the whole system. So we certainly want to avoid that if we could. And then, but what we do feel also, as Rodney said, that particularly because we're changing the traffic pattern coming from 2nd, coming northbound, there aren't that many conflicting movements, and we don't have reason to think there will be a problem.
It's going to be very hard for people to figure out where to go.
I might also mention it is also, as you said, all traffic in the end is somewhat self-metering, and if we're not as successful as we think we are, it may be that there's not as much new demand as you think there might be. That is, if people still perceive that there's a big problem, there might not be as many of them who go back to using that as you might otherwise think. So that's also a possibility.
True, but that would be pretty much the end of the businesses on East Shore.
Also, too, we've been working very closely together, and I think we also offer to both City of Berkeley and City of Albany to do any type of independent studies or double check on this thing as well. So, you know, I think Jeff has been exploring that idea as well.
That's correct. We haven't pursued it at this point, but based on council direction, if you wanted us to, we have talked to one of our consultants that we work with from time to time about the possibility of taking a look at some of the analysis here to make sure that the City of Albany's interests are being addressed.
Are there any other council questions? Okay, then we'll open it up to public comment. Do you have a lot?
I just have one.
Oh, okay. I think we're going to have more. So who do you have?
David Duggan.
Oh, okay. And anyone else who wishes to make public comment, please fill out a speaker card and bring it up.
Mayor McQuaid, City Manager, Council members, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, thank you very much for affording me the time to talk this evening. My name is David Duggan. I'm the Vice President and General Manager of Golden Gate Fields, which is part of the Stronach Group and owned and whole by the Pacific Racing Association. My primary concern with the development, might I add, working with these people has been very, very easy thus far, and I hope that continues. The north and south pedestrian overpassing is what concerns me. As an Irish citizen, I'm very familiar with north and south divides, and this one in particular causes me a great deal of anguish. The northern overpass would be hugely detrimental to our business at Golden Gate Fields. It will look into our stable area, which in itself is problematic. That is a licensed area, and it would cause a great distraction for us. It would also increase the volumes of traffic in that area adjacent to our stable area. At the moment, we've got a huge big fence around it. We try to keep people away from that area because it is a hazardous, very, very dry, arid place, and it would be prone to all kinds of health and safety issues. On top of everything else that we have to deal with at Golden Gate Fields, we do have, and we have had several instances recently with the animal rights people and PETA and others, and this would be just the greatest thing for them of all time to be able to have that to demonstrate and create a problem for the city itself. I'd be very hopeful that the southern footbridge would be the preferred option. From my understandings and listening to your council talk about finances earlier, the financial implications of a southern footbridge are a lot more favourable to the taxpayers of the area as well. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So Preston Jordan speaking for Strollers and Rollers. First I want to thank the Alameda CTC team. So Strollers and Rollers joined with Berkeley Climate Action Coalition Transportation Working Group and the Albany Berkeley Soccer Club and various rugby clubs a year ago last September and sent a letter encouraging Alameda CTC to think more expansively about the alignment of the overcrossing. We didn't receive any response to that until a new project manager came on about last summer, and she's made all the difference, so I really want to commend her. She pretty much immediately convened a working group, which I was invited to participate as a representative, and representatives of the Berkeley community were invited to participate in. We've met, I don't know, 10, 12 times, I lose track, but it's been really an incredible experience. I don't think all the mitigations to the crossing conflicts at 2nd and East Shore have necessarily been presented to you because they're in flux, but based on what I've seen and going to the Albany Strollers and Rollers list and presenting those and asking for people's opinion on whether the northern or southern alignment is preferable at this point in time, there's been no protest about going to the southern alignment. There has been concern and suggestions about more mitigations that could be explored for making sure that people who are on the cycle track don't get hit by motorists, or as few as possible get hit. It's kind of a good versus perfect situation. So the perfect situation is to have an overpass from the fields along Cordnesis Creek to the fields at Gilman so that people don't have to cross at 2nd Street, which will be uncontrolled, as you've heard, for the reasons you've heard. However, this project is not going to pay for that. It would pay for the northern U, so it would make it possible to create an extension in the future. But that would come at the near-term cost of $5 million extra and a long-term cost, additional cost of about $11 million. Funding uncertain, a number of other difficult questions, and also the alignment of the cycle track on the north side would be crossing through more traffic than the cycle track on the south side. So it would be crossing through all the traffic that would be accessing the transfer station, Second Street north of Gilman would remain 2 lanes one way, but 2 lanes one way, whereas Second Street south of Gilman would be converted to 1 lane one way, so shorter crossing distance, only 1 lane of traffic to cross. So with all that, we're confident that the mitigations that are being discussed and perhaps further mitigations that will be considered are going to be adequate, so that the investment of $15 million in this facility, which is by far 3-4 times as much money as the communities have spent on cycling infrastructure within a mile of there over the last 20 years, will actually perform. So I want to thank the team again for considering our concerns and improving the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elizabeth?
Elizabeth Pun, 1067 Peralta. Okay, I don't understand left and right as well as I understand north, south, east, and west when it comes to Gilman. But it seems to me this closes down all access from Gilman to the freeway, unless you want to go either north or south along 2nd Street to get to the next entrance. Am I wrong? Am I right? Because I can't see the way you guys talk. You know what you're talking about. This is new to me. I don't have the maps don't, and the way the speed goes when you're showing everything.
Please.
See, if you're going that way, and that's Golden Gate Fields, there's no way you're getting on the freeway that way.
So if you are coming along Gilman Street, coming out of Berkeley, and you want to get...
I'm not coming out of, well, yeah,
if you're coming down Gilman Street, you are in Berkeley.
You're right.
So you're coming down Gilman, and if you want to go on the freeway northbound or eastbound, because it's called eastbound, but it's headed north, you'll go along Gilman this way, you'll come through just a little bit of the roundabout, and you'll get onto the freeway.
Okay.
So that's one thing you can do. If you'd like to go towards San Francisco on the freeway, you'll come down Gilman, go around the first roundabout, go under the freeway, go around the second roundabout, and get onto the freeway here, and then you'll get onto the freeway that way.
That makes more sense, yes. Okay, that I can see. Oh, good, what a relief. All I can think
I might mention to you and others that online on our website, we do have in this same slideshow several animations that show dotted lines of how cars can move. For tonight's presentation, several people here have seen those. For tonight's presentation, I was asked to cut this a little shorter, so I didn't show those. But if you do want to go online to the ACTC website, the reference is on this piece of paper, and you can see those animated orange lines to show you how you would drive through the roundabouts.
So if I want to go to Golden Gate Fields.
So to Golden Gate Fields, you'd come through Gilman this way, come around the first one, under the freeway, around the second one, and now you're going in towards Golden Gate Fields.
If I want to go to the beach, I take, well, I'll just go down the other street.
Right, if you...
All right, now that makes more sense. Because you're saying left and right, and you mean left south or left north. I don't know.
Right. I confuse east and west personally, so I...
Thank you. Are there any other comments from the public? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council. Any final comments?
Just want to thank the ACTC and the entire team for coming and presenting to us and giving us very detailed presentation tonight. It's very, very much appreciated.
It's appreciated by me as well. I assume that in the lack of objection from the users of the folks who rely on the East Shore Highway, that they're comfortable with it. So I remain skeptical about that 2nd and Gilman intersection, but I'll defer to the experts. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I've seen numerous presentations on this, and you know, I think for a lot of people, this will be very complicated, and it's perhaps more complicated when you look at this than it will be when you're actually on the ground going into it. But I would hope that somewhere in the funding that we set up for all this, there was some kind of educational outreach once this is in place that you'll be able to do for members of the community. I think people will actually like it much better, once they get used to it. But it will. There's a learning process. We don't do roundabouts in America here, particularly so. But they're done all over the world and they work just fine. So I think it'll be fine.
Thank you for coming and presenting. It's exciting to think about not having a near-death experience every time you go down there.
Yeah.
Okay, and with that, we can excuse you all and move on. Okay, item 8-2, fiscal update for fiscal year 2017-18, first and second quarter. May we have a staff report, please? And there goes our audience.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'm here to present the second quarter financial results for the city, and I unfortunately don't have any videos to show you tonight, but hopefully the results will be equally as positive and well received.
It's a hard act to follow.
It is. It should be working. I'll try and talk louder. So what we're going to cover tonight is just very briefly some of the budget to actual results, looking at where we're ending up again for the second quarter, and then talk a little bit about some of the economic trends that also are affecting some of those numbers and maybe some of the things to look at going forward. And then at the council's pleasure, we'll answer any of the follow-up questions that you may have. So this very busy chart over here shows the second quarter financial results, and typically what we do is we compare where we are at this point of the year, and that's from July 1st through December 31st, to the prior fiscal year to see how we're doing. And generally, what we're seeing in terms of the revenues and the expenditures, we are fairly consistent, nothing unusual or untoward. I would like to, on the revenue side, just talk a little bit about where the three arrows are. Some of the larger revenue pieces that we collect: property taxes, sales taxes, and the franchise and other taxes. And as you can see by the dollar amounts, they represent a fairly large portion of the revenues that we're looking at. Just for the folks that aren't familiar with this, we typically, when we look at these results, we're focusing on the city's general fund. It's what we consider the checking account for the city. Most of the other funds that the city has are generally restricted in terms of the revenues that we receive and the purpose for which they can be expended. The most obvious one is our sewer fund, where we collect sewer fees and they can only be spent for sewer maintenance or repair. Let me just back up one sec. The first chart, the only difference between the first chart and the second chart is on the expenditure side. The first chart looks at the expenditures by department. The second chart looks at expenditures by category. And in this case, we're looking at roughly 4 categories: salaries, overtime, utilities, service, and repairs. And as we get into the kind of looking at some of the expenditure sides, I just want to point out that for the salaries, you'll see on the salaries and benefits side, we're a little bit lower than we were last year on the salary and benefits side, but on the overtime side, we're a little bit higher. And that's generally a reflection that we have a significant amount of vacancies that maybe affect, not as significant, but we have vacancies that are affecting the overtime costs in some of our operating departments. So with that, just to go to the expenditure piece, Generally, what you've seen on the charts before this, the expenditures are pretty consistent. With half the fiscal year gone, we have 50% or less, for the most part, in expenditures within the departments. The largest reason for expenditures being below that 50% is the vacancies that are within the departments. And I think, as we've talked about in prior council meetings, what you'll continue to see on the for CalPERS and pension costs, they'll continue to adopt some more conservative fiscal policies that will result in higher costs to cities like Albany. When we talk about cities like Albany, I attended a presentation by John Bartel a few weeks ago talking about what cities would be most impacted by the changes that CalPERS is looking at. Cities like Albany, when we talk about that from a pension standpoint, those are mature cities that have also enhanced benefits within the recent past. So some of the policies that we talked about would be the lowering of the discount rate, and I think, as we've recently seen, they're shortening up some of the amortization periods they look at when they're trying to recoup some of their losses. Overall, from a purely financial perspective, these policies that CalPERS is adopting is generally considered a prudent idea and strengthening the fiscal solvency of the plans. But from a taxpayer perspective and from a city finance director perspective, generally these things are going to result in higher pension costs in the foreseeable future. So looking at the revenue side, just to remind everybody, what we've been seeing for the past couple years is we've got some fairly robust property tax growth. And this is an interesting chart that we receive every year from the county assessor, where he identifies how much he expects the property tax roll to grow each year. Without going through the entire report, it just indicates roughly about 6.5% growth from last year to this year, projected for assessed values, and that's what you'll see in your column 11. So currently, we're experiencing some significant growth there. Historically, since 2006, we've experienced about a 5.34% growth annually in our assessed values. This was at a period that, as you know, a lot of communities outside of the Bay Area experienced significant reductions in assessed values. I need to point out, though, that some of the recent federal tax reforms may have a significant dampening effect in the future on these property tax values growing. Most specifically, the state and local tax deduction limits. That limit, I think, no more than $10,000 can be deducted in future income tax. And also for the mortgage interest limits, I think for new home loans for mortgages in excess of $1 million, it will limit the deductibility of that interest on your mortgage. And then the only other piece that I do want to talk about, not necessarily directly related to property taxes, but in the franchise and other taxes that we collect, one of those items is the property transfer tax. And this is basically a tax that we charge the homeowner when they transfer and sell their property to a new homeowner. Last year, it represented about $1.8 million, about a $340,000 increase over the prior year. This is a one-time revenue that we receive, and it's probably much more sensitive to slowdown in the property tax growth or slowdown in home sales. And the next chart just kind of highlights the growth in assessed value. And you can see, even during the 2009-10 downturn in the real estate market in most of the rest of the state, Albany and most of the Bay Area continued to achieve significant and continued assessed value growth going forward. Now let's take a look at sales taxes, and I have the two charts here that you have in your memo. One is our 1% Bradley Burns sales tax. This is the part of the tax that's collected statewide, where the city gets a portion of that, and then the Albany half-cent sales tax. Both, and this is the most recent projection from our sales tax consultants, both are continue to experience continued growth for the near future. One of the things to be aware of as we go forward is that internet sales continue to erode brick and mortar collections. And what that does is when we have an internet sale that somebody purchases something online in the city of Albany, instead of getting the direct taxes from that, we are allocated what's called, from a portion of what's called the county pool. The county pool distributes the tax based on the percentage that Albany represents in the total sales tax collections within the county. So, as an example, the city of Emeryville, which has a very high amount of sales taxes, receives a greater portion of that county pool. So generally, once it goes into that county pool, we see a much diminished collection of that sales tax revenue. One of the other things, and this is why we have the Muni Services folks work with us, is that we did track that one of our large sales taxpayers had misallocated the sales tax to a neighboring city. And what we mean by misallocation is each of the taxpayers report to the state where they're collecting their sales tax. For some reason, this well-established institution that's been in Albany for decades misallocated their payments. It resulted in a couple $100,000 being misallocated to another city. This was identified, and it's pretty easy to identify. As you know, we look at our top tax generators on a quarterly basis, and the misallocation will be corrected within the next quarter by the state. That really is the essence of the update. I'd be glad to answer any questions on the specific revenues or expenditures that we've experienced through the first part of the year. With that, I'd be glad to answer any council questions.
Are there any questions?
Sure, just one. Would it be accurate to say that we, comparing fiscal year 16-17 to fiscal year 2017-18, first and second quarters, that we were under budget by $500,000 the previous year and over budget by $500,000 this year?
One of the big influences in the revenue portion of that is our transfers in and transfers out. If you look on the first chart, what you'll see is the transfers in and transfers out. That's the $1.2 million in 16-17 and the $891,000. It's greatly reduced. That's really a balancing piece that we use to transfer out some of the monies to some of the other funds. So I would rather suggest that you look individually within each one of the categories that we're collecting the revenues, and also in the expenditure side as well. So yes, it is a swing between those two, but mostly it's due to that lowering of the revenue coming in from that transfer in from the revenues. But individually, the revenues are
well, off the top of my head, if you take that into account, and that's about a $400,000 difference there, a little more, $450,000. If you took that into account, we'd still be doing maybe on a par then, whereas last year we were under budget. This year we'd be kind of right on budget then.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's an accurate description. Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Just I thought that was important to note, and that hadn't been really called out here elsewhere. Thanks.
Questions? Do you have any questions?
Well, I think I understand this fairly well. I of course, my interest was piqued by the comment about the sales tax misappropriation. I don't suppose we can learn individuals involved with that, or is that more?
I can share that offline with the council, but specific tax information it's considered confidential when we identify the specific taxpayer. And it doesn't, the taxpayer has no incentive not to report it correctly. It's just a misallocation. I think one of the things that's happened up at the state that may have caused it is the governor has basically created a new tax collection department. The Board of Equalization is now the California Department of Taxation and Finance. And so 4,400 employees that were with the Board of Equalization, of the 4,800 that worked there, are now with this new department. And I'm assuming some of that has affected some of the collections. The other kind of thing that hasn't shown up yet in the sales tax is marijuana deliveries. And that'll be an interesting thing once we start reporting on that to see how that's reported. Essentially, what's going to happen now is, as the deliveries occur, somebody's going to drive a big truck up to Sacramento and drop off a lot of cash. And I think the state's struggling with how to process that, because we don't normally deal with actual dollars and cents. We're used to the electronic banking system, and so this has been proven very difficult for the state right now.
Also, would our soda tax revenues fall under sales tax? Is that where you would find?
That would be the other taxes. And last year we didn't budget anything for the sales tax. I think we collected about $55,000 before the year end. And as council saw I think at the last council meeting, we had about $225,000 collected. That's a little different because in that sense, we are actually functioning as our own tax collection agency, which is a little more difficult than just relying upon Sacramento to collect the taxes for us.
Okay.
So looking at that same expenditure and revenue chart, the lines 34, 35, 36, and 37 seem to be a fairly significant drop for this year from last year. I know the overall is pretty close, but I'm just wondering why some of those are so much lower.
Well, I would say for things like the intergovernmental revenues, because of Albany's size, that could be reflective of one grant. One large grant could affect that amount. And I could look specifically at some of the things, but really nothing jumps out at why there's a difference. The numbers are pretty small. And so any one small item could affect that significantly.
Great, thank you. Is there any comment from the public? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to council for final comments. This is
I think you have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Beth, you need to come up to the microphone, please. Sorry. Thank you.
All right, so member,
Can you speak into the mic, please?
oh, yes, sorry, very sorry. So you were saying, fines and forfeitures, we expect to have more, okay. Where did I see that? Intergovernmental revenue, what is that?
That's money we receive from other governments. That could be the county, the state, or the federal government.
Okay, because it's first and second quarter is half of what it was last year. Am I looking at the right one? No, I'm looking at the service charges. Oh, well, I'll go home and have fun. But is there usually that much variation between each year?
Typically,
between like the first and second quarter?
for some of those things, it could be just the difference between the distribution from being held over from one month to the other.
And probably timing differences too.
Some of the timing differences.
What's our exposure on the money we owe for retirement? The unfunded, unfunded.
That's a very good question, but we expect the liability to increase over the next few years based on some of the decisions being made by the CalPERS board, one of which we've talked about at the council, the lowering of the discount rate. But there'll be others that, again, as they try to increase the fiscal solvency of the program, it may require some additional.
We're probably going to have to pay more, and we should, because, I mean.
Okay, we need to stay on our topic here, which is actually this, this report. So if we can keep to that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other public comment? Okay. Bring it back to council for further comments. This is information only, so we don't need a motion. Anything to? Okay. Great. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Okay. Number 9, public hearing, ordinance number 2018-01, establishing property owner responsibility for sidewalk repair, first reading. May we have a staff report, please?
Good evening again, Mayor and council members. This is a public hearing for first reading of an ordinance that would implement policy direction given by council to staff in the summer of 2016. At that time, you adopted a sidewalk policy. We did some work at that time, including putting on the ballot a funding measure. And one of the actions that we're now bringing back to you is to establish an ordinance that would authorize us to require property owners to renovate the sidewalks in front of their properties, abutting their properties, at the time of sale of their property, as we do with sewer laterals, and at the time of major renovation of the property. Again, is something that we do at the time with sewer laterals. The ordinance is pretty straightforward. It is roughly patterned off of the sewer lateral provisions in the municipal code, and but customized a little bit for this particular situation, and then added to Chapter 14, which is the work on public property chapter of the municipal code. The proposal is that the ordinance would become effective on July 1st. This coincides with the adoption of a new master fee schedule, which would have some of the details, and that master fee schedule is updated annually, so we can adjust some of the thresholds if necessary. And it also gives us a couple of months to work with local realtor community and title companies and so forth to make sure that the framework is in place, so that the title companies really, the way this is really going to work on a point of sale is the title companies have checklists that they use when there's a sale that goes through, and this just needs to be added to their checklist. And then the realtors who are managing a transaction for their clients would then work with their clients to make sure that the city's requirements are implemented. And as I mentioned, it's pretty straightforward requirements in terms of how it works in the municipal code. And there would be provisions for if there's a unique situation, a hardship, or for some reason it's infeasible, there are provisions in the municipal code so that we can consider those situations. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
Just a question about the timing of this. We talked about this in June 2016. It took a while for this to come together?
Yes, it was just we have a long to-do list, and in recognition of, as we were working on the sidewalk program this year, recognized that this was something that we just needed to get before you.
Okay.
Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Yes. Okay, come on up.
Just the trees that we are mandatory having, since I have a nice mandatory camphor tree. I really think the city should take some responsibility if the trees that they say we should plant or can plant end up wrecking the sidewalk. I mean, they should, you guys say, you have to plant, and this is what's good for you. And if the sidewalk gets wrecked, I think there should be some provision for a little help. I mean, when I did mine, I couldn't even put my sewer outlet on the side between the sidewalk and the street because there was no room, so I had to just put it on my side of the street. I don't mind that, but I mean, to me, it was a little unfair, and then I just never asked for reimbursement. I just figured I'm a citizen and it needs to be done anyhow.
Thank you. Jeff, would you like to comment on that?
I think it's a good comment to make, and it's the street trees are the biggest complication to sidewalks. So it's an important reason to have the hardship or the infeasibility or just have some flexibility in how it's implemented is for street trees probably more than anything else. So if there was a situation where someone said, I can't do this because of an important tree, we have a street tree removal process that we'd have to coordinate with this, and that kicks in the exemption process or working with the city engineer to figure out a proper solution.
Right, and I think it's also worth mentioning that we have a sidewalk repair policy that the voters were generous enough to fund, and that's all part of this. So this is just one small piece of this.
And part of the policy as well was reviewing our street tree policies. We have long had a policy that was extremely protective of mature trees, and I don't think that would change. We would still be protective of those trees, but also looking more closely at their impacts on the sidewalk and potentially accelerating to a more desirable street tree selection where the sidewalk issues are just unmanageable. A lot of the trees are extremely destructive, and it's not really necessary. There are trees that won't do that.
Are there any other comments from council? Can I then get a motion to?
Do we need a motion on a first reading?
We need a motion to, and I need some help with the language. Is it introduce it for first reading?
Yes. I think you can read use the staff if you would like to use the staff recommendation. Right. You've completed the public hearing, so you'd be introducing for first reading.
Okay, may I get a motion to introduce for first reading?
I move that we introduce for first reading ordinance number 2018-01, establishing property owners' responsibility for sidewalk repair.
Does that need a second?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Poll the council, please.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Pilch?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Nason?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes, and the motion carries. That'll bring us down to new business, residential design guidelines. Could we get a staff report, please?
Good evening. Before you tonight are draft residential design guidelines. This is a document update process that we've been working with the Planning and Zoning Commission on for about a year and a half. So what is before you tonight is the final draft based on the discussion with the Commission and a series of meetings that we had. Just to give the council some background, the city originally adopted residential design guidelines in 1997. The current version of the guidelines as they exist today were substantially updated and adopted by the council in July of 2009. So in the time since, we utilized those guidelines to assist applicants, neighbors, staff, and commissioners in understanding and communicating the city's design goals through explanations within the document and also examples of high-quality solutions. One thing to point out is that as part of the Albany 2035 general plan, there was both a policy and an action to amend the design guidelines. In particular, the emphasis was to focus on the city's historical or architectural character, as well as include language in there to address contemporary architecture. The current design guidelines do not address contemporary architecture, and that had created some issues with more contemporary style projects that we've processed in recent years. Just kind of a big picture snapshot for you. Since 2009, when the design guidelines were adopted, there have been pretty significant changes both in the building code requirements, aesthetic preferences, as I mentioned before, significant changes to ADU regulations, and additionally landscape and climate conditions. All of these factors come into play when we work with applicants as they design their projects and have other considerations when pursuing an application. As I mentioned, the guidelines do not address contemporary architecture, and this has created some challenges and in at least one or two instances an appeal based on the integration of contemporary architecture into a more traditional style neighborhood. The current guidelines are set up with what are identified as 10 essentials for good design. As part of our analysis when evaluating a residential remodel application, we provide a brief analysis of each bullet point to the Commission as they make their decisions about applications before them. And the provisions, you know, some are broad and some are specific. So it could be as simple as, you know, the front yard as the house's contribution to the street, as, you know, to a broader point of building materials and that sort of thing. So the Planning and Zoning Commission took this up in September of 2016 and held a series of study sessions, including September of 2016, November of 2016, May of 2017, and then most recently in January of this year. So we overhauled the document to give it you know, more content. So we have a broad introduction. We've gone from 10 elements down to 7 principles, which are intended to more broadly capture elements of design rather than specificity. The document now addresses the architectural character from 1910 to 1950, which also captures the majority of the city's housing stock. We have a chapter in there on contemporary design, before and after photos to highlight successful projects, and then a brief entry on exceptional design and what that looks like. So rather than having the 10 principles, which had some degree of specificity and broadness, we now have 7 elements of design. So it starts with landscape design, outdoor space, architectural design, livability, context, accessory dwelling units, and parking. And just for the council's information, putting parking last was very much a deliberate choice by the Commission. In the current document, parking is more in the middle, and they felt that parking at the end is really where it belongs. The emphasis should be on getting a well-designed project. So we have a chapter on historic character, and it shows renovations with before and after images, as well as additions that are integrated into the existing building form, borrowing from that existing architecture. The contemporary architecture section illustrates projects that we've had in recent years with modern aesthetics that are balanced with the neighborhood context. The before and after photos are fairly self-explanatory. They show, you know, the before conditions and the after conditions to show successful projects. And then kind of a more minor note, but something important nonetheless, is that we've changed the format of the document. It's a larger format. We worked on the graphic communication of expectations. This includes sample plan details, larger example images, and font consistency throughout the document. As part of the packet to the Commission and also for the Council's review, we included 2 sample analyses with the guidelines as they are currently drafted. It's our anticipation that if you adopt the guidelines tonight and the forthcoming staff reports that we would write for Planning and Zoning Commission, it would utilize the 7 principles, and we would have that in the next packet. So this is intended to give you a snapshot. The image on the left is the old document, the 8.5 by 11. The image on the right is a snapshot from the proposed document. This happens to highlight the livability chapter, which provides you with both photos and then also principles within livability related to design, expansion types, sustainability, so on and so forth. This is an example of a before and after, a McGregor that was added onto with a second-story addition. So we've included that to illustrate that architectural integration in good form. These are architectural examples. We have a Tudor style on the left and a Craftsman on the right. So within the document, we've highlighted different architectural styles that you see around the community that give a brief description of kind of attributes of those particular styles. Here we have 2 examples of contemporary architecture in the city. With respect to a sustainability impact, the guidelines incorporate a wide variety of sustainable development principles. This includes bay-friendly landscaping, encouraging the use of sustainable building materials, and increasing livability for long-term occupancy. We did this in-house, so there were no financial costs borne by the city for the update of the document. The project is exempt from the requirements of CEQA. With that, the Planning Commission had adopted Resolution 2018-01, which forwarded a recommendation to the City Council to adopt the amended residential design guidelines. And with that, we drafted Resolution 2018-22 for the City Council, which, should you adopt that tonight, these design guidelines would go into place. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
I have no questions, but I'll have comments after.
Okay.
Yeah.
No questions? Okay. Are there, oh wait, I do have a question. In looking through this, I didn't see any specific reference to Albany Hill, which is a little more unique than maybe other parts. Are there any specific guidelines for the hills for things either to do or perhaps not to do?
We didn't discuss the hill in any kind of great detail like that. Certainly, it is a different architectural context, and I think the context there is, it's fairly different from the rest of the city, but we didn't include anything specific. We certainly could if it was the desire of the council to do so.
Okay, thank you. Are there any public comments?
Yes.
Good evening again. Doug Donaldson, a member of Planning and Zoning. Planning and Zoning Commission has worked really hard on this document over the past year or so, and we recommend your adoption of it by unanimous vote. I think we're really proud of it, and we look forward to working with the new design guidelines. It's a project we wanted to take on, and I think I'm certainly proud of the result, and I think all the other commissioners are too. So, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to council. And I'm going to start just because I'm already talking. I do want to commend Doug for his photos. I think you did most of the photos in this document, and they're really fabulous as always. Thank you. Okay, Nick?
So I'm glad you mentioned sustainability because I didn't read the documents, the old and the new, completely. But when you did mention sustainability, I did take a glance at the older document, and I've put that in here, and thank you for putting that in here for reference. So just to note it, the changes are quite substantial. The old document was 21 pages. The new one looks like 56 pages. But when you mentioned sustainability, I went ahead and searched for the keywords green and sustainable, and the older document has quite a few references to green building and Build It Green, Green Point Rated, perhaps our green. I don't think this is referenced specifically, but I do believe we have a green building code, which is a voluntary or a checklist of green items that which is a mandatory item, right, that you have to fill out for certain applications. And in the newer document, there are 2 sentences. From what I can see, it says sustainable design. When proposing modifications to a home, consider integrating solar panels or rain chains. Sustainability is important to think about with home improvements. So I wondered if you could talk about the differences in the treatment of green building sustainability between the old and the new.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2009, when the document was adopted, the Cal Green Code was really in its infancy. From 2009 to now, I believe it's been updated and adopted on 3 different occasions. So it's much more comprehensive than what we worked with at that point in time. And our finding, particularly in the last probably 2 to 3 years, is that projects that do come in are required to comply with the requirements of Cal Green, which were actually quite a bit stricter than the prescriptive standards that we had in our checklist that we had used for a number of years. So in working with the commission, I think a general conclusion was made that the Cal Green Code, just by how it's structured and implemented, addresses a lot of the, kind of the green and sustainability requirements as a matter of practice and making it imperative for projects.
That makes sense. Then I think my only comment might be to reference that in the document, maybe in that sustainable design section that, see the Cal Green Code for guidelines that you will have to follow for sustainable design.
I actually have a question. I'm curious if planning and zoning's experience has been that the modern construction, the modern designs stir up more neighborhood concerns about aesthetics, or whether they're being well accepted by the neighborhoods.
I would say it's been about a 50-50 mix. We've had some contemporary projects that go through without any reservation from adjacent neighbors. We've had other ones that have generated quite a bit of conversation and concern. And in one case, we had a fairly contentious appeal over a contemporary design within, a more traditional neighborhood context.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay, well, having been someone who worked on the 2009 guidelines, I totally appreciate the changes that came down. And I think at that time, I thought we had done a reasonable job, but there was that element of modernity that wasn't put in there. And in part, that was, I think it still wasn't as accepted as it is now. And it's not that everybody accepts a more modern architectural design, but a lot more people are open to it. And so I remember arguing that we should have something more about that in there, and it wasn't included. Kind of to speak to Nick's point, I mean, the difference between then and now is, as you said, it's just a whole lot more part of the code that things have to be sustainable and green, and this is design, which may or may not be, green or sustainable, but you're going to have to be energy efficient. You're going to have to, be all the things that are part of that green code. So, on top of that, you should have a good design. And I think with the examples that it gives, this is a great improvement. Back in 2009, or perhaps further back, a green design might mean, well, we covered it with shingles, or something like that, which really, by today's standards, you wouldn't consider that necessarily a green design. But I mean, there was this kind of If it's wood, then it's green, and if it was metal, well, that's not green. It confused these two concepts, I always thought. So I totally appreciate what planning and zoning did. I remember how much work it was back in 2009, so I'm glad you guys were able to pull this off. And I would move recommendation of adoption of Resolution 2018-22.
Second.
Poll the council, please.
Councilmember Moss,
Yes.
Councilmember Pilch,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Naston,
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid.
Yes, and the motion carries. Okay, other business announcements of events, future agenda items. Do we have any future agenda items? Seeing none, the next city council meeting will be on Monday, March 5th, and we will adjourn in memory of those killed in Parkland, Florida.
Do we not have a special session?
Oh. Do I need to announce a closed session?
You don't need to announce, but just for the benefit of the public, the council is intending to schedule a closed session for next Monday at 5:30 to discuss the pending litigation with the Albany Lions Club.
Thank you. And now we'll adjourn in memory of those killed in Florida. Thank you.